is your City Council Roundup, a recap of what's happening at City Hall with John Ongaro. The views expressed in this program are solely of those of the host and not necessarily those of the radio station or its partners.
Well, not a very busy night at council last night, but a consequential decision was made. First, the attendance. Only Mayor Boshkoff was away. According to his Facebook page, he's in Mongolia. Must be nice this time of year. I actually have no idea, and I don't think I could point to Mongolia on a map. Councillor Zazino was acting mayor. Trini, Ben, Skrtuga were all online. And speaking of the councillors, pretty much everyone announced that they're having a ward meeting in the coming weeks, except for the at-large candidates. They're still a few months away. First up, council approved zoning changes to a few properties in and around the city. Little debate on these. Outdoor storage, splitting up some residential lots, and a change for a healthcare building, all included. That portion of the meeting went quick. Next on the agenda, a deputation from the RFDA. They provided an update on their services, which, as you may know, is supplying food banks across the region as far away as Red Lake. They are very busy and a very important operation. Their requests for services are up 38%, and that's a lot. They were there to update council on the work that they're doing and send a thank you to the city for the corporation's donation to their cause. They're an important organization, and wouldn't it be nice if one day RFDA and other organizations like it weren't very busy at all or didn't even exist? They're important. Thank you, RFDA, for your important contributions to the community. Then here it comes. The James Whalen tug. Let's first recap some history. Important history in this little saga. Let's start with how it came to be. It was 1992, and the tourism department thought it was a good idea to take on the Whalen as a tourist attraction, one that was open to the public twice. Similar to the other tourist attraction, the Via Rail train, that I'm guessing a vast majority of the population doesn't even know where it is. It's on display at the Cam River Park, so check your notes. Tourism Department, 1992. And now it's an issue for parks and open spaces in 2024. You see where I'm going with that? So how did we get here? In April 2022, the 117-year-old James Whalen tug took on water and sank in the bottom of the Cam River. In September of 2022, the tug was recovered from the Cam River and placed in a temporary storage location, which, by the way, isn't free. The report came back to council, also identified that they need to reevaluate the Cam River Heritage Park and its service levels and some planning strategies in consideration of the condition of the heritage assets located in the park. You know, the rotting Via Rail train, the known challenges to displaying historical artifacts in that park, and the unsheltered homeless community needs there. So here we are. Council was presented with multiple options in a report following a delay from last week's intended presentation. Let me give you some of those options. There were 4 of them. Option number 2 was to reinstall the vessel on a shoreline and infill a location so it's not floating. That would have cost $1.8 million. Option 3 was reinstall the vessel onto the land adjacent to the shoreline. Couple of different options for that. The cost for that was $1.75 million. Option 4 was to sink it so that a handful of divers could have a look at it. $1.4 million to sink it. And option number 1, which was the recommendation from administration last night, was to recycle it at a dry land storage facility and retain some key pieces of the asset to be used for future historical artifact display, like the smokestack and the deck and the railings. Total cost for that, $540,000. So the recommendation from administration was to proceed with number 1. $540,000. And while we're at it, the city is still moving forward with expressions of interest of what to do with the Via Rail train. We forgot we even owned that. That could include scrapping it altogether, too. And so the debate began. This is one of those times where it's obvious to see who around the council table is there for fiscal responsibility and who is there for a popularity contest. It was obvious again last night who fits these roles. One by one, councillors stepped up to give their 2 cents and tell stories. You know, the story that Councillor Pascalino told about his buddy's $25,000 Mustang. I don't know. It didn't fit. But all councillors had something to say about it, except for Councillor Trini. First, Mark Bentz, who has become our financial watchdog in a sense, asked some important questions. Let's skip the historical part for a second. What does it actually cost? Because there was some confusion on what the cost and the price for the recommended option, $540,000, was. That's when it came out that this is plus or minus 30%. By the way, 30% of $540,000 is $162,000. So plus or minus, it could be $700,000, but there's more. Here's the part we forgot about. Right now, the tug sits at the James Street Bridge on land that isn't free. It costs us $50,000 a year for it to sit there. And it's been there for 2 years. Quick math tells us that's $100,000 spent and potentially more, as this group needs to kind of get off their keisters and make a decision on this, so we keep paying for it to sit there. So make the price tag of this recommendation now $640,000, potentially $800,000, with the plus or minus, plus the $900,000 spent to recover it from the bottom of the Cam River and move it to storage. The total cost of not taking care of things you own and ignoring historical and cultural significance on things we own has now cost us close to $2 million. Let that sink in. No pun intended. This is where Councillor Bentz did his duty to remind his peers once again that we have a $31 million infrastructure gap. That needs to come up at every single meeting, in my opinion, that there hasn't been any work to ask for funding for this sunken tug. And at the end of the day, we're going to be paying for this option yearly to take care of it. And eventually we'll look at scrapping it, much like we did with the Via Rail train that now sits and rots at Cam River Park. Next in the debate, Councillor Chung, who rightfully asked, if we pay for this from the park's budget, what else will get displaced? Meaning, what else can't we afford? Like perhaps the Waverly Fountain, she asked. Yes, Councillor, that's another neglected piece of history. Her question was valid, and there wasn't any answers. But here's what we did learn about parks budgets following that. Listen to this. Did you know that Parks and Open Spaces has a budget for maintaining monuments and historical pieces in our community? Yep, they sure do. Any idea how much that budget is? It's $50,000 per year. Total. $50,000. Thanks, Councillor Folds, for asking that question and being troubled by the answer. Unfortunately, this didn't make anybody look good because budgets are passed by City Council. And you've been there a long time. And at some point, you put your hand up to approve a measly budget for all of these historic items that we own and display that you think are extremely important to our history and culture. You were in the room to approve the money spent on other things instead of culturally important things you referred to. Which is it? Which side of the fence are you on? Have we forgotten that somewhere you approved that budget? Councillor Folds went on to say that public criticism isn't fair towards the Parks Department and administration when it comes to the tug. You're right, Councillor. It should be more directed at you and the other veteran councillors around the table that got us into this mess. Ask yourself how many fountains could have been saved or tugboats that could have been saved and cared for if we didn't use $6 million to design and approve a turf facilities for Chapels Park that eventually ended up in the garbage. $6 million. Admin didn't make that happen. Your council did. But you see, this is where it gets worse. Councillor Hamilton agreed, he said, not to rest the decision on administration because it ultimately falls on council. And I quote, he said, we chose not to invest in this. He also said, we chose to invest in other things. Good on you, Councillor Hamilton, for having the common sense to put your neck out and remind peers that they vote on these things, they approve the money, and that they are on the hook for it. The boat wasn't maintained for years. Councillor Folds questioned its impact on tourism. You know, the same department that brought it here in 1992. How it wasn't fair that tourism took this on and that the city administration is on the hook for it. That's not the first time this has happened, Councillor. See the Via Rail train again rotting. But he asked how much interest there is in the vessel. How many visitors did it have in its popularity? Well, I can tell you that the last time the boat or the train were open to the public was 15 or 18 years ago when there was a downtown event to showcase Cam River Park. The park, by the way, is beautiful. Docks for boats to park at, the Thunderbird statue. It really is beautiful, but it's been completely underutilized and ignored for decades. Administration didn't ignore this park. Who makes that decision? Council does. You can't spend money on things you're not approved to spend money on, and who approves the money? I need a drink because it gets worse. Sorry. All right. Then it was Councillor Gatuga's turn. As usual, coming in hot. At times rude and, as predicted, offended by another councillor, as he is one way or another at every single meeting. This time Hamilton was Gertuga's target. Remember, he was the one to say not to rest the decision on administration because it ultimately falls on council. We chose not to invest in it, remember? We chose to invest in other things, he said. Well, that fired up Gertuga. You know, the longest standing councillor in the room who keeps getting voted back in so that in the last 2 terms he can just sit there and get mad at everybody. He shouted that it's not council's fault and called Hamilton's comments of the sort asinine. Whoa! Bad word? Councillor Folds, the chair, jumped in with, "Oh, language, please." Gertuga went on to continue his bashing and the lack of accountability. What's asinine, Councillor Gertuga, is that you've been in that room for 23 years and somehow forgot that every budget in the last 23 years has your fingerprints on it. Every single one. That includes the one that approved a $50,000 yearly budget for maintenance of historical artifacts. That also includes the $6 million wasted on the chapel's turf that went in the garbage. $5 million wasted on an event center 10 years ago. Remember that one? And now $2 million to fix the underfunded and ignored sunken ship. I can go on and on. So, Councillor Gertuga, while you're getting your back up at your fellow councillors, take some accountability yourself for how we got to a $30 million infrastructure deficit, how a sunk tug has cost us $2 million because it wasn't taken care of, because it wasn't funded by the councils that you sat on. What's asinine, sir, is you ignoring the fact that for over 20 years you signed off on every single budget. You and the other veterans around the room are on the hook for this. These things don't just happen. They happen when you choose shiny new things instead of things you claim are historic and culturally important, Councillor Folds. Insert comment here about the Muskeg Express at Centennial Park. How much have we spent on that in the last 10 years? Did it run this year, Councillor Folds? It's historically important. You both have been there far longer than many. You both have approved these budgets. Cut the garbage of pretending you had nothing to do with it. You had everything to do with it. You spend without thinking, and millions of dollars later, here we are. It's no one else's fault. Council approves the money. You got us here. We need to stop pointing fingers at everyone else. You both also signed off on a $52 million turf that hopefully has more cultural significance than any of the other things that you've neglected or underfunded. Roads, bridges, buildings, people. I've got 52 million ideas on how that money could have been better spent. But here are 13 people each year who approve every nickel and constantly pick shiny and new things and want to be recognized with their name on legacy projects. Who are there to spend and who is there to take care of the citizens? The definition of asinine, by the way, is extremely or utterly foolish or silly, which this council comes up with for everything. A weak excuse for everything. But we signed the check last night, $540,000 added to the $900,000 to save a neglected tug and $100,000 to store it. A $1.5 million mistake and counting. The recommendation from administration passed 7-5. I'll let you guess who approved spending the money. The meeting ended at 9:08, and according to the city's website, the next meeting is October 7th.
Oh, gives you a bit of a breather, John.
I need it after last night. I'm just so tired of the finger pointing. The finger pointing is crazy because we got into this mess because of neglect. Neglect happens when you don't fund the right departments. It is not administration's fault. You cannot point fingers at Corey Alverson and the Parks Department or the city manager or the rest of administration because you approved the budget. And the city manager reminded them again last night. The next couple of budgets are going to be really hard. Mm-hmm. You made decisions to cut things and shiny new things made it through. And here we are.
But wouldn't a manager of parks and whatnot go down to the Cam River Heritage Park and say, yeah, we need to do some things here?
And then makes recommendations to council to spend money that they don't approve, period.
Okay.
There's nothing else to that. The parks manager can't just go and write a check. It's not how it works. There has to be a budget for everything. Well, I can tell you that James Whalen is $0 on the budget. Yeah. It's now costing $1.5 million.
Interesting point. And before we wrap up here is I didn't know this, and this is, again, maybe something that you didn't know listening to this this morning, is I didn't know there was a storage fee.
$50,000 a year.
I didn't know that, so
yeah,
there you have it.
For it to sit
Yeah.
there. So we've spent $100,000 already on it, but we're not really sure. Now that this recommendation's been approved by this group of geniuses, it may take another year before we decide what we're going to do with it. It takes work to figure this stuff out.
Yeah.
But now we're going to sit on it for another $50,000 a year.
All right, there you have it. That is your City Council Roundup for this Tuesday. A couple of reminders. You can go to 999thebay.ca and you'll find the wrap-up there. Or if you text the word council to our T-Bay-Tel Talkin' text line, 807-344-8229, you will find the wrap-up there, a direct link. John, thank you very much. As you said, a bit of a breather. Next Council Roundup is what, in October?
October. Phew,
Okay,
take a breath.
Thank you.